give folks some time to join in, but while we're waiting for folks to join us, I would encourage you to put your name and any organizational affiliation you might have in the chat so that we can see who all is with us this morning.
Recording in progress. Record.
Hey guys, we still have participants joining us, so I'm giving everybody a little bit of time to just get in and get settled, but I would encourage you, if you haven't done it already, to put your name and your organizational affiliation in the chat box. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and get us started this morning, or this afternoon, I guess. We have an important topic to cover, and I know one of our guests has to leave a little early, so I want us to make sure we have time to, have a full conversation. Just a couple of bits of housekeeping here. Keep your phones or your computers on mute when you're not speaking. There is opportunity to ask questions, and we do encourage you to do that. And so you would want to take yourself off of mute to do that, or you can also put it in the chat box, whichever way you feel more comfortable. That way we can kind of address whatever community questions there might be. If you didn't mute yourself, we might have muted you for you so that we don't have your background noise. And if that happens and you need to figure out how to unmute yourself, the button is on at the bottom of your screen. It says to your lower right. Sometimes it's on the lower left, depending. And then on your phone, it's usually *6. That hopefully will help with that. We also want to remind you and say a special word of thank you to AOC Community Media, who is once again recording today's meeting. They've been doing that for us on a regular basis, and we're really quite grateful. It allows you to go back and replay if there is something that you missed, or it is an opportunity to catch it if you missed it completely. And so thanks very much to AOC Community Media for providing that service to the community. We do have 2 special guests with us today to help us talk about the American Rescue Plan funding. And this funding is really a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for many communities to try to address critical needs that we've seen come to light as a result of COVID-19. It's an unprecedented amount of funding for most communities, and it really allows us to dive into, I think, what the impacts of COVID-19 have been on our communities, and of course in the housing and homelessness space, specifically how COVID-19 has impacted housing and homelessness. And so today we're excited to be able to have a conversation and engage folks that are kind of experts in this, as well as community members, to hear what we might want to see come out of this unique opportunity for funding and for problem solving. And so I want to welcome Maxwell Ciardulo, who is the Director of Policy and Communications with the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center, as well as Jackson Voss, who's the Economic Opportunity Policy Analyst for the Louisiana Budget Project. Thanks, guys, very much for being here with us today. And as I mentioned, Maxwell does have to jump off at 12:40, so I'll make sure that we kind of watch the time a little bit, and we want to get questions in before that time period. So we'll be mindful of that. Maxwell, why don't you go first? Would you be willing to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center does?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me, Lee. It's lovely to see all of you again. I know I've been on some of these calls before, and I always enjoy coming back. So the Fair Housing Action Center, we're based in New Orleans, but serve the whole state. We've been around for about 25 years. We're a nonprofit civil rights organization founded to fight housing discrimination and segregation. But we do that in a couple of ways. We do some direct services. So we have a legal team that provides pro bono legal assistance to people who have been victims of housing discrimination. And we take cases from across the state related to that. And then we also have, we just recently hired a eviction defense attorney that is going to be working, I think is based in Lafayette, actually, and working with the Acadiana. I think they're sort of situated within Acadiana Legal Services. And then we have an eviction defense attorney here in New Orleans who does that similar work. And that's new work that we picked up since the pandemic because it's such a crisis, obviously. We do home ownership protection work, so help people who at risk of losing their homes deal with their mortgage servicers. And we do that across the state. And then we do outreach and education and policy work. And so the policy work is where I sit, and we do that at the local level in New Orleans. We will occasionally provide a helping hand to folks doing local advocacy in areas outside of New Orleans where we can. So feel free to engage me on that. And then we work at the state level, at the state legislature, to try and pass protections for folks. And then occasionally at the federal level, where we engage our congressional delegation around things like the American Rescue Plan Act. So yeah, that's what we do.
Thanks so much. Vitally important work. Jackson, would you be willing to do the same? So give an intro for yourself and tell us a little bit about what the Louisiana Budget Project does.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. My name is Jackson Voss. I'm a policy analyst at the Louisiana Budget Project. We are call ourselves a think and do tank. We are a research and advocacy organization that focuses on issues that affect low income and moderate income families here in Louisiana. We are pretty involved also in the state legislature, especially around issues concerning the budget and tax policy, but we also branch out into a number of other areas. I personally have been, I have some background, by way of background, I used to work on the Hill. And so I've kind of taken up the mantle of understanding and researching and kind of helping people navigate the American Rescue Plan Act, among other things. And we have a lot of different publications about that I'm happy to share and are also available on our website. But looking forward to the conversation today.
Great. Thanks both of you very much for being here. And Jackson, I'm going to push it right back to you for kind of our first question, which is just to simply give a bit of an overview of what the American Rescue Plan Act funding does, why it was implemented, how it's going to be dispersed, how long people have to spend it, those kinds of pieces of the puzzle, a little bit basic background.
Absolutely. So looking at the whole picture here, the American Rescue Plan Act was passed March of this year. It was a $1.88 trillion rescue relief package intended to kind of stabilize the economy and begin to jumpstart the recovery from COVID-19 and the pandemic that we've been living through and continue to live through. This package was made up of multiple different parts, and I'm going to drop a fact sheet into the chat for folks related specifically to the housing parts of the package. But as part of this, there were things that were kind of came down through various different ways. So there was money that came down directly to for certain purposes, and a lot of the housing money kind of falls into that category. Some of the money came down in the form of discretionary money that could be spent by the state and local governments, including here in Louisiana, as they wish. About $350 billion was reserved for that. And of that, Louisiana state and local governments got about almost, not quite $5 billion, about $4.8 billion. So about 3 of that went to the state and 1.8 billion of that went to local governments. And so as it pertains to housing, there was a lot of things. The bulk of the money really went towards emergency rental assistance. We still kind of are seeing most states, including Louisiana, having a really hard time getting that money to people who need it in a timely way. And that was the case for the rental assistance in previous packages as well. Unfortunately, there's also money for people with mortgages, homeowner assistance fund, emergency housing vouchers, some anti-homelessness programmed money, and also money for rural homeowners and people who have USDA housing loans. But so there was a lot of different components of this package that pertain to housing because of the way that housing can both either enhance or make worse the public health threat of COVID. So it was a big priority, and also a priority for kind of stabilizing the economy, because obviously, as you know, housing insecurity causes economic insecurity, and economic insecurity causes housing insecurity. So is that a good brief rundown?
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate that if anybody has questions as we go through this, if you want clarification on something that we're talking about, we can take questions as we go. We'll also have a little bit of time at the end for just more generic questions, or if you didn't get your question answered as we keep going. But we'll keep talking, and anybody who has a question, pop in there. Maxwell, has the Fair Housing Action Center been doing any specific advocacy across the state as it relates to the use of the ARPA funds? Are there some civil rights equity issue kind of pieces that are needing to be considered in this work as we move forward? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have collaborated with the Louisiana Budget Project and a couple of other groups, specifically groups that are advocating specifically for kids and children and families, to put together some recommendations, some housing recommendations for that American Rescue Plan Act fund at the state level. And I appreciate you bringing up sort of disparities and thinking about how we make sure that this is targeted and doesn't end up sort of re-entrenching some of the sort of race, class, gender, and disability disparities that already exist. And so part of what we did, we made 3 main recommendations, but they're really all overarching in that what we're essentially saying is that this funding needs to be targeted at the people who are most at risk. People most at risk of homelessness, people most at risk of some of the most serious consequences of having unstable housing. And so the 3 things that we talked about were first, a right to counsel program in eviction court. So to make sure that anyone who appears in eviction court has access to an attorney. That's something we do in criminal court, but we don't do in civil court. And it has been already tried in plenty of places around the country, in cities and at states. And it always reduces evictions and homelessness. And it always saves the jurisdiction that does it money. Because they spend less on healthcare costs, on homelessness services, on incarceration, on foster care, and all the other cascading effects of people losing their home. So that was one of the primary recommendations. One of the others was for folks who have already lost their home, that we spend that money on non-congregate shelters, right? Hotel rooms to help people safely shelter in place while we can provide long-term affordable housing, right? That's something that we have crafted and worked on specifically with Lee and Arch and other COCs throughout the state. And then the third piece is creating that long-term affordable housing. And so what we recommended is that some portion of that money be put into a program similar to the National Housing Trust Fund, which is something that Congress created, but then we have a Louisiana Housing Trust Fund and every state has their own. And the goal of those funds is usually to serve people at 30% AMI or lower. So again, folks who have previously experienced homelessness or are at deep risk of it, to make sure that, we know that like the housing market is never going to create new homes to meet the needs of people who are that low income. And so we have to ensure that we're using some public resources to do that. So those are the 3 recommendations that we've made so far through that document. And again, the goal is to sort of help people most impacted. And I think the data bears out that we see the racial disparities, the gender disparities within that data. I know specifically from New Orleans, because it's where we have the best data on it, Black women make up 57% of people in eviction court, which is far higher than the share of the population in New Orleans. And I think there's national data that suggests that is pretty much the case everywhere. So if we want to talk about making sure that we are helping the folks most at risk, like those are the recommendations we're putting forth, and that's sort of our justification.
Yeah, it's critical that we think about how we can engage in the work of a community. It can engage in a process that would pull in the various stakeholders and that we continue to put pressure on decision makers to not necessarily follow established paths for distribution or follow established procedures, because we know that those tend to have some systemic injustice kind of pieces built into them, and that we have to kind of build in the process for equity as we go into this process. And so I'm wondering, how are these recommendations being received? Are you getting some additional feedback? Are you getting a lot of pushback? What are you seeing as those kind of recommendations roll out across the state?
Well, I can jump in quickly, but Jackson, I think you might have some more to add too. So I haven't had I've started to have conversations with legislators and some of the governor's staff about some of these pieces. And I think primarily their reaction so far has been that they haven't started to think about that quite yet. Like that's farther down the line. So I'm not getting specific feedback necessarily. But I think, they're always interested in things that pay for themselves or save money, right? And it's unfortunate that this is the way we have to have this conversation, but this is how it always works with legislators and the governor, is it's about the dollars and cents. So they're always interested in things that save money, and they're interested in things that are sort of useful. With this money in particular, they'll be interested in things that are good one-time uses of funds, right? They'll be hesitant to create a program that would need to be sustained for years into the future if this money only exists, in a way that it can be used for 1 or 2 years. So those are some of the things that I'm thinking about, as I'm crafting arguments for these things as well.
Yeah, I don't think I don't have too much to add. I would say that, especially at the state level, I think a lot of the focus right now is currently on this upcoming redistricting special session. And so there has been not a ton of conversation that I've been involved in yet about how we will spend the second tranche of ARPA dollars that are coming in May. I have a feeling that'll change the closer that we get to March. But I do think this is a really good time, especially as advocates, to kind of be coming around and coalescing around different proposals, and kind of as we've been able to do with Louisiana Fair Housing and these other organizations that we partnered with in helping write this brief, to kind of find ways to set the groundwork for policies, because many of these legislators, and as I'm sure you know, have other priorities and jobs, and they don't usually have the time or the capacity, especially without staff, to really kind of get into the policy making nuts and bolts. And so it gives us an opportunity to kind of provide them some suggestions that are more detailed.
Great. Sorry, a motorcycle just zoomed past. The process itself, I think, is a really interesting. As I mentioned, this is sort of unprecedented. It is really an unusual set of circumstances where there is just going to be a ton of money for distribution, and yet still not quite enough to do all the things everybody would want to do. Or probably even all the things that I would want to do. And so it's an interesting situation where we really have to develop new systems for coming together to think through what we could do with this, and create the decisions together about where are our priorities and who's determining where those priorities are and how that process goes. And so I'm wondering if in your work, if you've seen any examples, obviously, of like advocacy groups coming together like you guys have is one way that we continue to push for new or different opportunities. I'm wondering if there are other communities that you've seen that might be doing something creative, where folks like those that are gathered on this call might be able to plug into efforts that can continue to lift these messages, or engage in the process of helping to identify what the priorities are or should be. Either one of you. I didn't call on one of you.
Well, our work is pretty focused here, so I haven't been looking around to other states as much. But I do think that that this community and the other communities that are organized around the continuums of care in other parts of the state are going to be really essential in making this this push. Like, I don't think this is the sort of thing that is going to get any traction if it just comes out of New Orleans. It has to be something that comes from all of us around the state. And I think I've been thinking a little bit about sort of how we correct some of those inequities you were talking about, Lee, in terms of like the way that, the previous programs have been run. And one of the things that I've thought a lot about is the emergency rental assistance program, and the way that the state distributed funds for the emergency rental assistance program based on the total population of a parish. What that meant is that a small parish that is maybe 75% homeowners got more rental assistance funding than maybe it needed because it has such a small share of renters. Whereas larger parishes like Lafayette, like Orleans, like East Baton Rouge, Caddo, received less per capita per renter, and certainly less per low-income renter, and that had a disparate impact on groups who are more likely to be renters. Again, the same groups that we're talking about, African Americans, and other sort of disenfranchised groups. And so, I think if we are to create some sort of recommendation moving forward, I think, again, it'll be useful to have all of us together speaking with the same voice, not just to suggest that we need, housing funding, but getting even a little more into the detail about how we make sure this is equitable and make sure that funding is dispersed in a way that is actually accurate and meets the needs of the people on the ground. Not just thrown out based on population, which is not we're not distributing funds that everyone needs. We're distributing funds for people who are most at risk, and so that should be allocated based on who is most at risk in each parish.
Yeah, Maxwell, I think that's a perfect illustration of the ways in which sometimes this kind of, here's this overwhelming amount of money and you have to hurry up and spend it, at how that leads to, kind of further entrenching systemic injustice and inequity, because on its surface, at a kind of surface level, when you say, okay, well, you have all this money and we need to divide it up across the state. Well, what's the way to do that? Okay, well, we're going to do that by population. And that just keeps the ball rolling without anybody stopping, or maybe not stopping early enough in the process to say, wait, maybe that's not the most equitable way of distributing it because of these other reasons that we need to be considering. And so what I'm trying to get at in my question is, are there some of those pieces of the puzzle that need to be especially focused on as we talk about particularly the use of ARPA funds for housing or homelessness services? And I think it is to some degree some of what you're talking about, identifying where the population with the highest level of need is and how is that work being done, or identifying, is it renters, is it homeowners, do we need to develop more housing, and is the development of housing needed more in a particular area than another area, and how do you determine that? Is that by vacancy rates? Is that by, or where are shelters? You talked about the non-congregate shelters, and certainly Arch has been advocating locally for some ARPA funds to be utilized for developing a permanent non-congregate sheltering program and location. And so, where are those locations? What is most needed, and how can we help our politicians engage in a process that will produce some more equitable results? What are the pieces of the puzzle that need to be lifted up? And maybe we've mentioned them all now, but if there are others that you know of.
We've done this.
Oh,
Yeah.
Is somebody else trying to ask a question?
Yes, my name is Sharon. I'm in Lafayette with Sun Chodo, and we worked closely with Jackson Voss on the Lafayette area, where Jackson can explain better that there are certain areas that qualify more for the ARPA funds, and we've had a lot of pushback from the council and the particularly the mayor's administration in his desire to put the monies elsewhere. So we did do some community things, like 3 community programs where people could come in and learn about ARPA. And we've also done a North Side Ask. The North Side is particularly the area that is qualifying for these funds. So we are trying to do what we can to educate the community and push back to the mayor's office on his choices, which are not necessarily directed at the people who need it. And maybe Jackson can answer more about that, because I know he was specifically involved in that effort.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for saying that. Was actually what I was about to talk about. So I'm glad you that you brought it up. So I actually might have forgotten to mention in my overview. So the ARPA funds have to be allocated by 2024, and they have to be spent by 2026. But another way of thinking about that is that we still have 3 years to decide what to spend this money on, and we still have another 5 years to actually spend the money. And so I think it's important to kind of, one of the things that we need to, as advocates, and one of the things I'm trying to emphasize to people is, so we have all these urgent needs, and obviously you want to get help to people quickly. But I think what we're seeing happening instead is legislators and lawmakers at the state and local level are saying to themselves, we have all this money and we can spend it now without real regard to whether or not that's the best way to be spending this money. And also without serious consideration of how the money is meant to be spent. So one of the things I'm trying to remind people is that we can take a beat, we can slow down, we can make sure this money is going to the right places and to the right policies that will have the best effects for us as a state and as communities. And the law is really designed in a way to help encourage that, right? And so the American Rescue Plan Act has provisions within it that really provide for greater flexibility in the way that you can spend money at the state and local level. This is the discretionary state and local funds that I mentioned earlier. You have more discretion to spend those funds in what are called qualified census tracts, QCTs, which are those are places that have been identified by the federal government as being like the highest need, either because they have higher poverty rates, higher unemployment rates, and so on. And so this is really, if you were to take a look at the map, and actually I can share a link to my presentation for y'all so that you can see it. And you can see in that presentation, sorry, I'm trying to change the settings so that you guys can actually look at it. And so this is a presentation that I've been using for the city of Lafayette. So on slide 10 of this, you can see kind of in purple, these are the QCTs in the Lafayette area. And so these are places where the state and also local governments can spend these dollars with a much broader definition of serving public health and combating economic inequity. And so that can include things like building affordable housing or building non-congregate shelters and emergency shelters. You can do those to a certain extent in other places, but you can definitely do them in these particular locations. And as was just noted, the north side of Lafayette is really the most concentrated need, as identified not only by the people who live there, but by the federal government. And this is really where these dollars are meant to be spent, is in these high need areas. Because they also, not coincidentally, are the areas that were most heavily impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, largely because of pre-existing conditions in those places. So trying to make sure I didn't leave anything out there, but I think the two things that we need to try to make lawmakers realize is that there's not actually a rush to spend all this money. Even though it's coming now and next year, you don't have to spend it right away. And it's better to spend this money the right way than it is to just get the money out the door and, for example, spend it on relief for movie theaters, which is exactly what the state did last year, right? We got $1.5 billion and the state turned around and said, here's $25 million for movie theaters. I like movie theaters as much as the next guy. I think the snack quality has gone down over my lifetime, but I don't think that was a very good use of this money, especially when people are losing their homes, don't have jobs, and are struggling to get by. I can think of a lot of different ways to spend that $25 million that would have been better. And I think that as advocates, what we need to do, kind of to Max's point, is we need to be able to kind of come together around these particular policy areas, kind of advocate for each other. And even in areas that we're not necessarily working on or don't have expertise on, kind of supporting each other in making sure that these dollars are at least going towards things that serve people rather than, your buddy who owns a movie theater.
Linda, you have a question?
Yeah, I have two questions. One of them is mainly probably for you, Lee. Are there any organizations that are trying to get adjudicated housing and rebuild and remodel and sell to people who are in poverty to create home ownership? kind of like Habitat for Humanity, only except, doing used houses? That's one question.
Yes. Oh, well, go ahead.
Second question, and then I'll shut up and you can answer. My second question is, Jackson and Maxwell, since you guys are dealing with legislators, is there any effort at all toward dealing with the cliff effect in the housing area? Do y'all know what the cliff effect is? Okay, so cliff effect means a person who maybe is unemployed or even homeless, they get the job, they start making money, and government services begin to be pulled away from them at a much higher rate than what they can possibly earn in raises. And we had a girl named Stephanie who went through our program and had no house, no car, no nothing, got a job, did better and did better and better, got one raise too many, and she didn't get much more money, but it put her over into the next category, and her housing shot up $400 a month. $400 a month. She was afraid of becoming homeless, so she quit the good job where she had risen to a management position and went and got a job cleaning hotel rooms at a hotel on the north side because she was afraid of becoming homeless. So that's going to have to be a situation where it is dealt with the regulations, the housing regulations, and the way that they decide how much you have to pay in rent. But it's not only happening in housing, it's happening with food stamps, with Medicaid, with everything. It's making it it's just making it very, very difficult and challenging for a person who wants to escape from poverty. And that's the biggest struggle that we're having in our organization. So those two questions, who wants to answer?
Let's try the second one first, because that way Jackson and Maxwell can jump in. I know Maxwell is going to have to leave shortly.
Yeah, Maxwell, if you have anything to say before you have to go for it.
Sure. I think that's a really important question with regard to the cliff. I think most of the recommendations that we're making that wouldn't apply. So I think our recommendation for ensuring everyone has access to an attorney in eviction court, I think the best way to do that is actually to not means test it. I think it should be available to everyone regardless of your income. And not only does that make sure that everyone has access to it who might be at risk of eviction, but also it actually saves time and money, because the process of means testing it and then making someone, pull the paperwork to prove their income is just a lot more time and effort. We've seen that with the emergency rental assistance program, that it's not worth it. Similarly, for the program that Lee and we've been working on to try and make sure that folks who are unhoused have access to hotels. That's not anyone who's on the street is not going to have an income, right? That's a program that's available to everyone who is in that position. But I think when we talk about actually creating new affordable units, that's where this comes in. And I think there are a lot of HUD programs that allow for some significant flexibility between, you may have to qualify at a low income, but there's space for growth before the assistance is removed. And I think we can make sure to write that in. Because this is a Treasury program, there are no HUD regulations that come with it. And that's often where you get tripped up. And so we can sort of write those own regulations in ourselves. There's a lot more flexibility here to make sure that there isn't a cliff like that. The last thing I just wanted to also mention is just to respond to what someone mentioned in the comments regarding people with disabilities. And I think that's a group that's often overlooked. And so I just wanted to name that and say that the three things that we mentioned, I think, would also really significantly help people with disabilities. So a lot of the eviction cases that the Fair Housing Action Center gets involved in are actually fair housing cases. They're cases where people are being removed from their home because of a service animal or some other issue related to a disability, where in fact the Fair Housing Act protects them. And so people have access to attorneys who could stop a lot of evictions for people with disabilities that way. Secondly, I think that any new housing that we created, new deeply affordable housing that we created, we can also create within that set asides for accessible units and units for people with disabilities. So I think there are absolutely ways that we should make sure that we are addressing that disparity as well.
Yeah, and I'll just say one last thing about the cliff effect. So the state I will say this, the current administration, both the federal administration and the governor's administration, are prioritizing the easing of benefits cliffs. And so I think we will see not necessarily in this piece of legislation, but potential future administrative actions in particular, that there'll be more efforts made to kind of make sure that people are not thrown off of assistance that they might need. I know that, for example, the Department of Children and Family Services are going to be pursuing a number of different legislative changes in this upcoming session regarding like low-income assistance, state-based assistance that they have control over. And I think that we will see also as programs are being reauthorized by Congress, hopefully there will be kind of small changes made to kind of more accommodate. Obviously, I think anybody who's paying attention to Congress right now will don't hold your breath. But there's, I think, a strong possibility that we will see a particular focus to making sure that people who are either kind of exiting a certain income bracket that qualifies for assistance are not necessarily thrown off of that assistance right away. I think that's become kind of as seen broadly in policymaking spheres as like the next thing we need to tackle. So I think that's kind of a priority for a lot of different people right now. And the state is actually working on a cliff tool to kind of help people understand like how to avoid falling off the cliff, and also to help policymakers understand like where have we created cliffs that we need to address. Where
can I get a copy of that cliff tool? And is there somebody I could contact and join a committee or something to get involved in making? I don't know the answer to getting involved. It's being created by the Atlanta Fed, the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. And I don't know when it's going to be made public. I just know that it's being made. I've been able to sit in on a few webinars for that. I'd recommend maybe signing up for emails from the Atlanta Fed. They do a lot of different policy things, but they usually make their webinars public. And I can share my email address with you, Linda, and we can follow up on it again later. But I've not heard anything on the progress of the Cliff tool yet. I just know that it's coming. Yay.
I think it's a great example of how a lot of these things sort of intertwine. Jackson was talking about kind of speaking with one voice across sectors. You know, if I'm focused on housing, but the policies around some of the Department of Children and Family Studies, Department of Children and Family Services work, like childcare assistance or like food stamps or like FITAP, and those types of pieces of the puzzle can impact somebody's ability to remain housed if those policies are set up so that there are these cliffs or something along those lines. So, you know, everybody's an advocate across the board, or we can't get this work done at all. It's kind of it's all meshed together in wonderfully messy ways, I'm afraid. Linda, to answer your question about adjudicated properties, I know that there are some nonprofits and groups that are working through the process of clearing titles and getting those, and Habitat for Humanity is one that does that. I think I saw on here somebody from Habitat earlier. If you guys want to jump in and say something about that, feel free to do so.
Yeah, Lee, this is Melinda. Sorry, I haven't been on video because I was eating my lunch and nobody wants to see that. But we do actually and have been applying for vacant adjudicated properties, nothing with an existing house on it. And I know there's some other organizations interested in potentially applying for homes that are vacant and adjudicated, but we've gone for the vacant properties just because we're building new houses on them and doing scattered site infill and then sell to people who are low to moderate income, mostly 30 to 60% AMI. And that's all focused in North Lafayette and different neighborhoods there. And I think Sun has also been working in that space too, in the adjudicated property space. So I know there's been a pickup of interest, but you know, we have an issue here with the fact that we don't have a clearinghouse. So the burden is on the applicant to do all the curative work for titles and, you know, for getting it to where it could be marketable. So that's an issue. But yeah, I'm very interested in, coordinating with others who are in that space, and also potentially, working on affordable housing that will help ease this crisis for so many people who really need and have the ability to move into owner occupied where they can. And we need more rental stock too. So
I know, Maxwell, you need to go, but let me tell you publicly, thank you for joining this conversation today. I really appreciate it. I'm glad that you were able to jump in here for a few minutes. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Nice to see you
all. Go ahead. I want to.
This is Sharon again with Sun Chodo. As a Chodo, we too are involved with the adjudicated properties, and we've received our first set of properties in Lafayette, which we will be then building affordable housing. And so we're going to submit for another set at the end of the year. So the adjudicated properties process is complicated, but we're moving forward.
I'm sorry. Who was that just spoke? Because I can't tell on my Zoom.
It says Chris Williams. He's the CEO of Sun Chodo in Karen Crow, Louisiana. So I'm working with him. I'm speaking for Sun Chodo.
Could you put information in the chat room so
Sure.
I can contact you?
Sure, we'll do that.
Thank you.
We are coming kind of to the end of our time, but I do want to go ahead and open the floor. If those of you have questions about the American Rescue Plan Act funding or housing and homelessness in particular, then
so do you want me to put your...
There we go. Then now is the time to ask those questions, and Jackson and I will do our best to answer it without Maxwell, or we can get back to you on it. Jackson, I'm wondering if there is anything that is particularly exciting to you that might be on the horizon in this work that you are at liberty to share and or.
I'm not sure exciting is the word I'd use for anything on the horizon right now. Unfortunately, I think I do think that we have a lot of opportunities, and it's going to take a lot of hard work to kind of to achieve the outcomes we're hoping for. I do think that, right now, here's what I will say. In the Louisiana context in particular, 2022 session is really going to be primarily about setting up the election cycle in 2023. And I think in that way, legislators might be more willing to consider proposals from a wide variety of people that they would like to see vote for them or donate to their campaigns. And so that, is both opens a lot of possibilities for us, but also a lot of possibilities for people with a lot more money. And so I think we need to be conscientious about paying attention closely to what happens in this legislative session. And kind of to the original point, I think to Maxwell's point as well, finding ways to provide everything. Like if there is something that you and like fellow advocates agree needs to happen, kind of doing all that groundwork as far ahead of time as possible and kind of getting in people's ears, whether it's the governor's office or your local legislator or legislators that you think will be friendlier from other places. I think that there's a lot of opportunities here. I do think that especially in the housing area, between what has happened in this past year as a result of COVID and the economic distress that's caused, but also because of Hurricane Ida affecting especially the kind of parts of the state that are not necessarily used to experiencing mass housing insecurity in the way that they are right now. Housing is something that a lot of people are thinking about or at least tweeting about. Whether or not that will result in them voting that way on things is to be seen, but I think there is a way for housing advocates to take advantage of this in a way that'll help kind of press forward everybody's objectives in terms of getting people into housing and making sure that people stay housed. I think that especially you can see a lot of Republicans for the first time noticing that landlords can evict people on short notice with very little recourse, and thinking that that's a bad thing now. I think that's an opportunity that we shouldn't let pass us by. So I would say I think that housing is maybe one thing where we can get some bipartisan consensus as well. Hopefully, we'll see. It is not as easy as that, unfortunately, but I think that there is reason to be cautiously optimistic, as long as we can get the things ready for it.
Well, we do have, over 50 folks on this call that are engaged and interested and want to try to find ways to help. I think that one of the challenges, even for those of us in this space, is that all of this is all new and all of this is all complicated. And it requires a lot of coalition work and a lot of kind of joint advocacy along paths that may not have already been established. So we're having to engage in different directions than we're used to engaging in, which is all good in the long run, but also kind of presents challenges for how to get it done. And so what might people do as they leave here? I know you talked about like signing up for, email lists. Your organization, Jackson's Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center, and the Louisiana Budget Project is certainly two that put out information on advocacy issues. At the national level, the National Low Income Housing Coalition is one that I turn to repeatedly for information on what's going on at the national level, as well as the National Alliance to End Homelessness. It's another really great advocacy organization specifically around homelessness issues at the national level. So joining into those kind of emails and staying updated and engaged. Obviously, Arch tries to send out information as well, but all these folks are on my email. And so are there other opportunities for folks? Would you make suggestions for how to continue to be engaged, how to strengthen our advocacy skills in this regard, especially at this kind of critical juncture?
Was this a question for me, Lee?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
You have an answer?
No, I think in terms of strengthening advocacy skills, I think it is something that we're working on. I think really meetings like this are a great opportunity to kind of come to some common understandings, set priorities, and so on. I would say that I think that one of the big challenges is that obviously we're all at least somewhat disconnected over the past 2 years now because of COVID. It has made it harder for everybody to kind of maintain or establish new relationships and kind of understand who all the other players in other rooms are. I think many of us are now deeply familiar with people in our, or at least the Zoom faces of people that we kind of work in the same arena as, but that's a different thing than coming to the legislature every year and seeing each other. I think that there has to be some kind of cross advocacy meetups or something that are going to happen eventually, but to kind of make sure that people know each other and can fight for each other. But I would say, I think obviously signing up for the email list is a good way to know what each organization is working on. I would say, please feel free to contact me. I know that Lee's doing lots of work, and obviously this meeting is evidence of that work of getting people together around this area. But I think that as we get closer, more and more people are going to be interested in what we're talking about today, kind of getting together and setting an agenda. I'm not sure. We usually at the Louisiana Budget Project, or not usually, we were able to host one conference before the pandemic hit, and we have not been able to host another conference since then, unfortunately, but I'm hoping that we'll have some sort of gathering that would be safe for like advocates from across the state to attend either. If we did do it, it probably would be virtual, unfortunately, but I think, it's what we have to do for now. As far as like kind of training your advocacy muscles, that might take more. It kind of comes with practice. I think you kind of have to. I would say this is budget season for a lot of local governments. I would say go attend or watch your local government hearings and see what's going on. And if you want to get involved in direct advocacy, feel free to reach out to me. We do a lot, and we help other advocates across the state kind of understand what has and has not worked for us. And I'm sure we'd be happy to help in whatever way we can. So.
Thanks very much, Jackson, for that. I do want to mention that ARCH does continue to work as a coalition to advocate for and ask specifically the Lafayette City Council as well as the Lafayette Parish Council to prioritize using some of the ARPA fiscal recovery funds for the non-congregate shelter program. If you have not already signed on as a supporter of that and want to, I'm going to dump that in the chat in just a second. And certainly it goes out in our email a lot. And so I would encourage you to add your name to that as a way of kind of amplifying our ask. We have seen some success, so we should celebrate in that the Lafayette Parish Council did allocate about $500,000 specifically to Faith House for their work in addressing the domestic violence that has increased. And so the parish council did some good work around that and got that done. So we're going to continue to advocate for non-congregate shelter and then also the response for domestic violence, knowing that a lot of the folks that are ending up homeless have had an experience of domestic violence that contributed to that. So that's some advocacy work that's going on in Lafayette, but every municipality, every city, every parish did receive some of that same fiscal recovery funding and as part of the ARPA funds. And so there is opportunity to potentially ask some of those other areas to also contribute to addressing homelessness and housing related concerns. And so if you have connections with any of those folks and want to bring that up and or contact me, and I'm happy to help you bring that up, we can talk about ways that, all the little towns from here to Mamu can do something that could address homelessness and housing related issues, because we know we're experiencing them very acutely across Acadiana in particular. There was a report out not that long ago that listed Lafayette as one of the highest rental rates across the state, like higher than New Orleans and Baton Rouge, which is mind-boggling to me right now. And had Louisiana listed incredibly high. I think it was like third or fifth, somewhere in that range for at risk of eviction and at risk of foreclosure. So we're seeing this across the I don't need to tell you guys how much of a crisis we're experiencing, y'all know, but helping to get the resources to undo the crisis and to help get us back moving in the right direction instead of continuing to fall off cliff after cliff after cliff as it relates to housing. Are there any other announcements or questions that anybody else has at this time that you want to bring up related to this or something else going on with your group?
I think Clancy has her hand up.
Oh, sorry. Hey, thanks. Clancy, you have something?
I just was thinking about when Jackson was talking about the Louisiana Budget Project and different programming that they were able to do or not able to do, virtual or otherwise. I thought about when I first became acquainted with, when I first learned that the Louisiana Budget Project existed, which was when Dylan Wagspack and somebody else came to the South Regional Library and did a town hall about healthcare because they were trying to, discontinue the Affordable Care Act coverage and all that. So, and the effect that it would have on the state budget and everything. So, that's how I started following Louisiana Budget Project. And so, I mean, and generally, I think town halls like that are really important to do. The one that I'm talking about was very well attended, and I was just wondering if anybody has any town halls, because I mean, certainly Louisiana Budget Project isn't the only organization that does town halls, but if anybody's planning one in the future, maybe how to spend the ARPA funds, because I think that's what. When we were trying to get them to hold off on making a plan to spend all that money, we were saying, hey, we need more time to have town halls and talk about how to spend it. So yeah, my question is, are there anybody planning any town halls?
No, and I know Sun Chodo did one already, or a couple of them. I don't know. Is anybody else planning conversations or town halls about this?
I can say from LBP's perspective, I think obviously it makes sense for us being in sort of a centralized position in the Louisiana policy ecosystem to sort of try to host something like that. It's something that I've been wanting us to do. I'm gonna be honest, we have not had the capacity or bandwidth to focus on planning an event like that, but hopefully as things slow down this fall, hopefully, it hasn't happened yet, but I think it could happen. I can keep y'all posted either through Lee or if y'all contacted us. I would say if we do end up posting something like that, it'll absolutely go out in our daily dime and other communications that we distribute on a daily basis. And so, but I think stay tuned. We may be able to host something like that from LBP. To build on some of the conversations that have happened. And obviously the North Side, I think, did set some good examples for how this could work in terms of engaging the community and getting folks to think about how should our money be spent in this dire time. So.
Again, with Sun Chodo, we have done quite a few town halls. Recently, we did one on redistricting and how our community, at large could participate in that voting process and why it's important to them. So our next town hall that we have on the books is the first quarter of 2022. We did a town hall on adjudicated properties, but it was specifically on how you can take advantage of that. Well, no, it was specifically on how you can prevent your property from being adjudicated. So our next one is going to be on how residents can take advantage of that process. It's not just for nonprofits. As a community resident, you can take advantage of the adjudicated property process. So that's what we have planned for early part of next year. And we'll probably we'll try to get some information out so that everybody's aware of it.
Great. Well, this has been a really good conversation today. Thanks to everybody. Thanks, Jackson, for coming and sharing your expertise with us. I really appreciate you being here today, and all of you guys for being here. I have two quick announcements really fast. One is that the next meeting in November, which is our last meeting of the year, will be November 18th at noon. We also have our Arch Lab series scheduled for November 10th. It's a Facebook Live. It'll be with Dr. Howitt with Beacon, and then also the Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week, which is a national awareness week the week before Thanksgiving. So that's coming up, and there'll be a few events going on around the region. So stay tuned for a little bit of that coming at you. And that's all I have. Thanks very much for being with us today. I know we're over time, so we're just gonna say bye and head out. Thanks very much. Take care.